May 14th, 2026, in a dramatic high-stakes diplomatic day in Beijing, the leaders of the world's two largest economies met, and the conversations reached far beyond trade and technology. At the center of the talks, a war that has reshaped energy markets and shipping lanes and has put the narrow stretch of war at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, at the heart of global concern. President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping sat down for extended bilateral talks. The White House issued a terse but consequential summary after the meeting. The United States and China agreed that Iran must never possess a nuclear weapon. The statement made clear the point in plain language: Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. It also reiterated a shared opposition to any attempt to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a militarized choke point or into a waterway where passage might carry a price. According to officials traveling with the U.S. delegation, the Chinese side, the White House, says also opposed militarization of the strait and any move to impose tolls on its use. It was a notable convergence. For months, the strait, a strategic funnel for nearly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil and gas, has been at the center of the conflict that erupted in late February. Iran's moves to assert control over the waterway, allied attacks and retaliatory strikes, and the broader U.S.-Israeli campaign against Iranian targets have produced waves of diplomatic activity and mounting pressure on commercial shipping. With oil prices jittery and vessels stranded, any easing of hostility in Hormuz matters not only to governments, but to every market, port, and refinery that depends on uninterrupted flows of hydrocarbons. Shortly after the summit, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio, traveling with the president, spoke with an American network in Beijing and sought to underline areas of agreement. He told his interviewer that he had raised the Iran crisis in the media NGS and had secured a clear response from his Chinese counterparts. The Chinese side said they are not in favor of militarizing the Straits of Hormuz, and they're not in favor of a tolling system, and that's our position, he said. Rubio framed that as an important diplomatic line. The United States, he said, will not support any effort to transform the strait into a tool for coercion, nor will it accept the idea of mines or a tolling regime in international waters. The tone of the summit, and especially that line on the strait, carries practical implications. If Beijing is prepared to voice opposition to militarizing Hormuz, Washington argues China could also use its economic leverage with Tehran to push for measures that restore commercial passage. That possibility matters because China remains one of Iran's closest major partners and one of the world's largest buyers of oil. Any Chinese willingness to nudge Tehran toward de-escalation could tip the balance on a waterway where then minor incidents ripple through global energy markets. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who accompanied the president in Beijing, put the economic angle bluntly. In an exchange with reporters, he urged Chinese engagement and described reopening the strait as plainly in China's own interests. China should open up, he said, a short, pointed appeal that reflected Washington's broader case. Economic stability and energy security require the free flow of commerce through Hormuz, and China has both the incentive and the reach to help make that happen. As the diplomatic choreography unfolded in Beijing, separate developments on the ground and at sea underlined how fragile any progress remains. Iranian state and semi-official outlets reported a significant shift in practice. Tehran has begun allowing some Chinese vessels to transit the Strait of Hormuz after what those reports described as an understanding with Beijing about Iranian management protocols for the waterway. The semi-official Fars news agency, citing a source it described as informed, said that the move followed requests from China's foreign minister and China's ambassador to Iran. According to the accounts, Tehran agreed to facilitate the passage of certain Chinese ships under conditions tied to Iran's own operational control of the strait. Those reports were striking because they suggested a partial practical accommodation at sea, even as political tensions remain raw on land and in capital meetings. State media in Iran said the decision was taken under the rubric of the strategic partnership between Tehran and Beijing, and that passage would occur under Iran's protocols for managing the strait. Observers cautioned that those allowances might be limited limited and carefully choreographed, a narrow corridor of relief for select vessels rather than a wholesale reopening to all commercial traffic. But even a limited green light for Chinese-owned or chartered tankers and bulk carriers could ease bottlenecks, unclog stranded cargoes, and reduce immediate pressure on price-sensitive energy markets. Not far from that developing tale of negotiated transit came a harsher reminder of the maritime risks that have proliferated since February. On the morning of May 13, an Indian-flagged wooden cargo dhow en route from Somalia to the United Arab Emirates was struck in Omani waters and later sank after a fire. The vessel, identified in Indian communications as MSV Haji Ali, caught fire after being hit. Crews were evacuated and the Oman Coast Guard mounted a rapid rescue. All 14 crew members were pulled from the sea and taken to safety at Dibba port, a successful rescue operation in the fog of a much larger confrontation. New Delhi's Ministry of External Affairs reacted with sharp language. India called the attack unacceptable and urged restraint, underscoring a diplomatic calculation that the targeting of civilian merchant mariners must not become normalized. The incident reverberated beyond in Dia's response. British maritime risk management firm Vanguard assessed that the explosion aboard the dhow was consistent with a drone or missile strike. Those assessments, while preliminary, raised fresh alarm about the weaponization of unmanned systems and the use of relatively low-cost munitions to threaten commercial shipping. Across the region, other maritime and port incidents have compounded the danger to sea lanes. Ship tracking data and agency reporting showed some commercial vessels still stranded or forced to reroute route, while insurance premiums and voyage deviations have already added costs to an international supply chain key to just-in-time logistics. For the global energy system, which has sustained months of interruptions and uncertainty, the sudden loss of even modest vessel capacity can cascade. Refineries delay purchases, buyers scramble for alternate cargoes, and markets price and risk premiums that ripple through consumers and producers alike. The diplomacy in Beijing and the partial reopening for Chinese ships sit alongside a sharpening of rhetoric in international forums. In New Delhi on the same day, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi attended a gathering of foreign ministers from BRICS nations. Araghchi used his platform to level a fierce accusation at the United Arab Emirates, saying the UAE had been an active partner in this aggression against Iran, and he alleged had refused to condemn attacks when they began. He insisted Tehran had evidence of direct participation and called on BRICS states to condemn what he described as violations of international law by the United States and Israel. At the BRICS meeting, Araghchi balanced his accusation with a rhetorical posture that would be familiar to many diplomats' readiness for military defense, coupled with a stated preference for diplomacy. While ready to fight with everything we have in defense of our freedom and our soil, we are equally ready to pursue and defend diplomacy, he say. As I have repeatedly stated, there is no such thing as a military solution to anything related to Iran. The line underlines an important Iranian calculus, an insistence on sovereign defense, while simultaneously arguing that the long-term route to security must be through negotiation rather than sustained escalation. Those competing narratives collided with another front of the conflict, Lebanon. Lebanese state media and the national news agency reported that Israeli strikes hit a southern town, killing at least one person and wounding others. Ambulances were dispatched to the scene, and local health authorities described the aftermath in terse, tragic terms. The Lebanon front has repeatedly shown the conflict's capacity to spread geographically, drawing in militias, state actors, and proxy forces, and adding to the regional humanitarian toll. Back in Beijing, the convergence between Washington and Beijing on several narrow lines, opposing the militarization of Hormuz, rejecting the imposition of tolls, and denying Iran the option of a nuclear weapon, offered a diplomatic opening, but experts interviewed across the day cautioned against over-optimism. Agreements on paper or in joint statements are only as durable as the incentives governing the actors involved. China's relationship with Iran is multi-layered: energy, investment, and strategic calculations that go well beyond the immediate pressures in Hormuz. Beijing may, in the short term, allow some relief to shipping to protect its energy access and stabilize markets. But whether it will apply sustained pressure on Tehran to reverse the policies that close the strait depends on a matrix of economic, security, and reputational calculations. The U.S. side framed the China engagement as one piece of a broader strategy. Secretary Rubio, in his comments, sought to make the point that U.S. policy would remain firm on protecting international waters and resisting any scheme to monetize passage. Treasury Secretary Ribes has economic appeal. China should open up was a shorthand for mobilizing Beijing's levers of influence in service of broader maritime freedom. For shipping companies and insurers, the day's developments were a reminder that the line between diplomacy and danger runs through the same narrow waters. Allowing a select group of Chinese vessels to transit under Iranian protocols does not eliminate the broader hazards that have led to attacks on neutral ships, the use of drones and missiles at sea, and the increasing politicization of commercial navigation. Operators and governments will watch closely whether the partial openings reported by Iranian media are sustained, scaled, and extended to vessels of all flags, or whether they remain selective gestures tied to big power politics. For regional actors from the Gulf states to coastal navies, the calculus is different but equally stark. They must balance sovereign sensitivities and the risk of becoming theaters for wider sea. Confrontation against the economic imperative to keep ports, pipelines, and terminals operational. Oman's Coast Guard, which rescued the crew of the Haji Ali, has been playing a steady, if understated, role in keeping maritime search and rescue functioning amid the fog of war. That boots-on-the-water competence will matter more as commercial and naval vessels continue to thread a narrow path between deterrence and disaster. The human cost, finally, is immediate and indisputable. Families of the seafarers pulled from the water will want answers about who struck their vessel and why. Relatives of civilians killed in strikes will mourn and demand accountability. Diplomats will parse language about no military solution and never a nuclear weapon for leverage. Markets will price in the risk and adjust. And the strait itself will remain both a physical choke point and a symbolic test of whether great power diplomacy can translate into safer shipping lanes and lower probability of wider war. But as night fell over Beijing, the headlines emphasized convergence and cautious hope. Two global powers had spoken plainly about preventing a further martial turn in the Strait of Hormuz, and some commercial traffic, at least for now, and for some ships, has begun to move again. But when a dhow sinks after a suspected drone strike and a regional minister accuses a neighboring state of direct participation in a wider conflict, the limits of high-level agreements are starkly visible. Diplomacy in the coming days will matter. So will accountability for strikes at sea, the mechanisms by which transit is coordinated under any Iranian protocols, and the follow-through from both Beijing and Washington on the lines they have declared ships must be allowed to move, civilians must be protected, and any agreement that aims to stabilize the Gulf must be more than words on a statement. It must be a sustained pattern of behavior that reduces the incentives for further attacks, lowers the tempera, at sea, and restores the practical rhythms of trade that billions depend on. For now, on May 14th, 2026, the world watched a rare alignment of language between the United States and China, observed a selective easing of passage through a contested waterway, and registered anew the dangers that continue to threaten seafarers, markets, and civilians across the region. The coming hours and days will tell whether that alignment proves durable and whether the narrow corridor of calm will widen into a stable route for commerce and diplomacy.